what a winter general election looks like in the UK. It has been teeming rain on the banks of the Thames all day, and yet people have been coming out to vote in the constituencies that we were able to visit here in the capital. Of course, that's not indicative of the country as a whole, but turnout was high at some of the polling stations we went to. We'll tell you more about that in a little while. Behind us there, you can see the House of Parliament. You had a prime minister who did not have a working majority. We've been reporting on the gridlock that's been going on before and since Boris Johnson became prime minister to clear the air this general election with that date in mind of a January 31st exit from the European Union. The stakes are higher than ever. Andrew Hillier has more.
Dawn on a day that could decide UK policy for generations to come. For the first time since 1923, British voters are heading to the polls in December to decide who will govern the country. And in this Lake District town, some voters had a hard time making their minds up.
Yeah, I turned up today and I really wasn't sure. I put the cross where I put it at the very end, but I didn't know until I did it.
I was still undecided walking up the steps into the polling station this morning. It's been a very difficult choice. Really has been choosing the least worst option, which has been difficult.
The party leaders were among the first to vote. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spun the ballot as the Brexit election, saying a vote for his Conservative Party is the only way to get Brexit done. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says the election is the last chance to save the National Health Service.
A great victory.
The Liberal Democrats are hoping that a pledge to undo Brexit will be enough to swing voters.
Morning, First Minister. How are you feeling?
And north of the border in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish National Party has made a second independence referendum a major issue. Each vote is decided on the basis of the first-past-the-post system, which means that the candidate who gets the most votes in any given constituency will be declared the winner. 650 seats are up for grabs in the British Parliament. A party needs at least 326 seats to get a majority, without having to rely on smaller parties for support. A hung parliament is when no one wins overall control. If that happens,
And with a little over 3 hours and 45 minutes to go before the polls close, let's say hello to our first guest. Philip Blond is an Anglican theologian, political philosopher, and the director of the Res Publica think tank. Thanks for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here.
Now, this moment after you've cast your ballot, and you cast yours in Kent this morning?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I did.
All right. And you cast your ballot this morning in Kent. This is a moment before we start watching the frenzy of the exit polls and the news channels where people are still lining up and on their way home from work, on their way home from classes to vote. And it's, if you've already cast a ballot, a moment for reflection. And for you, is the reflection about what's been going on since the last general election, or what's been going on since the Brexit referendum, or what's been going on, well, really it's the last decade in the UK?
It's really the last decade, and it's also what's been happening in France with the Gilets jaunes. What we're possibly in the middle of is the centre-right party, the Conservative Party, becoming a party of the working class. And people, the working class, in the middle of leaving the Labour Party. So working class people, if the polls are to be believed, are in the middle of shifting from the socialists to the Conservatives. And we see this across the whole West, from Trump right through Europe. And they're doing that because essentially we've been governed by liberalism of a left-wing sort and a right-wing sort for probably 30, 40 years, and it doesn't deliver for working people. So Brexit, whether or not you agree with it, has become totemic for the British working class as a sign of a post-liberal alternative to rampant insecurity and cultural marginalisation.
Of course, that's what was predicted in 2017 in the general election, and it didn't happen. We had Labour voters who had voted Leave who still stuck with their party.
Well, you're quite right. And I remember going into Theresa May's chief of staff when he had this strategy, and I said, you haven't done the work. You don't have enough policies, and you haven't put in the time that you need. But Brexit has done this work for the Conservative Party. Brexit is like a toothpick that digs voters out from the Labour wall and transfers them to the Conservatives. And so Brexit, the big issue, has been what has motivated the working class to come across. Now, we don't yet know if they've come across in sufficient numbers. We know that the Conservatives are unlikely to gain seats in the south, but in the Midlands and in the north and in Wales, they really are resting their hopes for a majority on working class, the working classes moving towards them as they are offering Brexit, which, for better or worse, the working classes think is in their interest.
And the same could happen in the other direction for other people who traditionally voted Conservative in the past.
Yeah, what you've got is the middle classes have gradually been leaving the Conservative Party for either the Liberal Democrats or Labour. But actually, quite a high percentage, something between 16 and 18% of Conservative Remainers, people who want to remain in the European Union, are so appalled by Jeremy Corbyn and his anti-Semitism and what's viewed as left-wing extremism that they're staying with the Conservative Party. So the Conservative Party is on the brink of inventing a new dream coalition, the post-industrial working class, and still has a hold on the middle class.
But it's not as big a tent as it once was.
Well, nothing is. There are no bigger tents in Europe anymore. On the one hand, you say that, but if you actually look at the main parties, their voting share has gone up, but they've polarised. And so what we're seeing again, both in France, in the UK, and in America, is massive voter fragmentation and polarisation. And it's whoever can stitch a coalition up out of that fragmentation is likely to win. We just don't know at this stage whether Johnson's done enough. In my view, the Conservative manifesto didn't have enough genuinely pro-working people policies. But Brexit might do the work. Brexit is like Heineken, it reaches the parts that other forms of politics can't reach. And we will see tonight. I think there's only two choices, really, either a hung parliament, in which case we will have a second referendum, because there'll be no other way that I can see. So we've got either a second referendum if we have a hung parliament, or we have a Conservative majority, and in my view, a hard Brexit.
So you're a theologian, your thinking is about what is the community. That's your remit.
Yes.
And here you have this wedge that's been driven in. Can you put it back together again? Is there a way to refine that sense of community?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we've got to recognise that liberalism as our governing agenda is really relatively recent. It only goes back in the UK to the end of the 1970s. And in France, it probably just goes back to people like Jospin, and the great, it's not that recent. And what's actually happened in society is nobody has done the work for organic unity between all the different classes. And as your great thinker, Christophe Guilly, has pointed out, what you've had in France is migration displacing indigenous working classes from points of opportunity in the cities and pushing them out into the periphery. And those sort of forces are present everywhere.
Is that the truth, though, or is that a fable that's been sold, the idea that...
I think it's...
Because we know, looking at the statistics, that you're going to need... You're going to need more mobility. You're going to need more migrants in the years to come here in the UK.
But that's also because we're suffering a demographic, a collapse in fertility. We're below replacement rates in many, many European countries, and in part that is because we only value autonomy, and so we're creating a world in which people don't want to have children. And if you don't want to have children, then you pull in migrants. So it's all part of the whole, and we've got to create a society in which normal people can prosper. And in the West, we did that through welfare. Remember Mitterrand thinking that welfare was that's the weather speaking to us.
Yeah.
That welfare.
How are you there? You're okay?
I'm good. Don't worry. We can cope with the blitz. We can cope with a bit of rain. Is that Mitterrand thought, the great post-war thought was that welfare would make this society, but it hasn't, because welfare and wealth have diverged, and people who live on benefits can never ever catch up with people who own wealth. So we do need a new social and economic compact. And again, as your economist Thomas Piketty has argued, we need that at the financial level, but nobody's doing it at the cultural level.
Okay, so yeah, you wrote a piece in 2018 in which you said that Labour was addressing the issue of how to build a better economic society, and the Tories were addressing the issue of how to build a better cultural society, and nobody had a holistic approach.
It's true. In everywhere I do polling across the whole of Europe, and the politics of the future are economically left and culturally right. And if you look at places like Poland and Hungary that are vilified by Macron, for example, that's because they offer an alternative and they offer that model. Now, Poland...
Or because they're playing fast and loose with rule of law.
Well, you say that. I don't think that's true. I think it's not the case that the separation of powers is the only way to do democracy. Because it's really clear there are no neutral spaces. If your media and your law courts are governed by liberal assumptions, liberalism is just another ideology. Right. So we're in a world where if liberalism doesn't deliver for ordinary people, if liberalism just makes people insecure culturally, socially and economically, there has to be an alternative. And looking back through history, there's been many alternatives. We're not at year zero. And so I think the successful political leaders of the future will be those who track left economically and track right culturally. That is the mix of the future. And we have to do it in a just and ethical manner.
A just and ethical manner, because from what you're describing, it could be an illiberal future?
Well, a liberal future might be a better future. So the greatest enemy of...
I mean, tell that to Hungary's opposition, which has just seen this bill that's been put forth to tighten rules on whether or not they can build working groups in Parliament.
Tell that to the woke generations in America and increasingly in Britain who do sectional politics. Right. So sectional politics that ignores class. Right. So you think of a way in our world today, what you have is feminism has become captured, for example, by liberal bourgeois, well-positioned women who argue that they're victims, but they don't do any form of solidarity with working class women. And the politics that we've been lost through identity politics says that I can't form common bonds with a person of different colour or creed. And so what has been lost by liberalism is any sense of anything shared, a shared project. And any good society has to have a shared project. And my claim is liberalism cannot give us a shared society anymore. That's why we're in the politics we're in. That's why we're having the vote we're having tonight.
We're having the vote we're having tonight, Philip Blond. Of course, there's not going to be any closure, though, at 10 p.m. when the polls close, because whatever the outcome, and you spelled out the two most probable scenarios, you're still going to have to try negotiate a trade deal with the European Union, do all of those things.
But in a way, you will have closure, because if Johnson gets a majority, I think, look, both sides, I think, have played this badly. I think the British have played it badly, but nobody talks about the Europeans playing it badly. And the Europeans have played really a cynical, quite brutal game with the British, and they've pushed Britain into a position where people will go for a hard Brexit and won't mind, because this is...
Wasn't that Theresa May's fault for starting the clock?
These things are always shared, in my view. And if you wanted Britain to remain, and I think Macron has been incredibly hostile to Britain and British interests, and I think that's very foolish of him, because there is no European security without the United Kingdom. And if Europe had played it differently, the Remain majority in this country would have been more activated.
I can't speak for Emmanuel Macron himself, but the argument that's for a lot of people around him have told me is that we prefer if the United Kingdom remains in the European Union, but we do need is closure, not prolonged uncertainty.
Well, we're going to get prolonged uncertainty anyway. If Macron really wants to strengthen Europe, you have to have Britain in. By 2050, it's going to have the largest economy, the largest population now that Turkey isn't going to join it. It's the equivalent of a balance to to Germany and to France, and many of the other smaller countries would like that.
And maybe Emmanuel Macron would agree with that.
He would, but his method is not achieving his end. I rather like the clarity of his vision, but his method works against the goal he has set himself. So what I'm saying is Europe has pushed Britain into a corner, but Britain does not capitulate. Britons just don't give in. And if they feel they're being treated wrongly, they will, as a nation, go for hard Brexit. And that, I think, will diminish both the UK and Europe. But you can't, I mean, history tells you can't push Britain around. It's not culturally within the country to kind of throw up our hands and give up. And so if Johnson does win a big majority, I'm not just being sort of glib here. If Johnson does win a big majority, the vast majority of the British people, including those who vote Remain, will be behind it and be behind hard Brexit.
All right, there's a prediction. One final question for you.
Yeah.
You talk about this being the age of insecurity.
Yeah.
What can we do to change that?
Stop thinking through liberal means. Forgive me for repeating myself, but look, since the dawn of human beings, we have operated collectively as well as individually. Liberalism tells us we only have to operate individually and we don't need to operate collectively. And the modern insecurity in the West comes from forgetting we also have to operate for the general good as well as for our own individual good. That is why we are experiencing the crises that we face. That is at the origin of our discontent.
It goes well beyond the banks of the Thames.
It certainly does, and it extends all the way to America and all the way into the borderlands with Russia.
All right, many thanks, Philip Blond, for
Great
joining us
pleasure.
here in the France
Great
24. And we'll be looking ahead. Again, if you're just joining us here on France 24, we're in a special edition from London. Little more than 3.5 hours to go before the polls close on a rainy Thursday for a general election in December. We saw people turning out bright and early to vote. They showed up to vote before going to work, before taking the kids to school. We spoke to people in one of the big swing districts across the river in Kensington, where they told us in some of the voting stations that we went to, that turnout was on pace to be with that of 2016 and when there was the Brexit referendum. Of course, those are just a couple of polling stations that we visited to. That's not how the whole of the UK has voted. We don't have numbers for the whole of the country. But what we did see was that people were energized and people wanted to vote. And the British don't care if it rains or not. It's time to bring in our next guest at this point in time. And let's say hello to Alison Pollock, who teaches at Queen Mary Newcastle University. Oh, wonderful. Okay. The author of NHS PLC, The Privatization of Healthcare. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Did you vote this morning?
I did.
Where did you vote?
Well, actually, I live in Scotland, in Edinburgh. So, of course, there the choices are between SNP and Labour in most of the seats.
Right. There's also Conservatives in some parts. It's not.
Yeah, not so many, but not where I am. Yeah.
Okay. In Edinburgh. So you'd sent in a postal vote, or you voted this morning?
I sent a postal vote because I was down here. Yeah.
Any news from back home in terms of turnout?
I don't know.
Not so far. So it's interesting because some people have been desperately trying to find an issue that's not Brexit on which to vote. And the one that's come up the first, and we saw campaign appearances by all the candidates, beginning with the whoa, and there you have the water once again falling. I think if it's okay, we're going to move a little bit forward. Thank you. And that is the National Health Service. I don't know if you've heard, but there are strikes going on.
I have heard. In your hospitals in France.
In the hospitals, but everywhere.
Yeah,
For us, the thing that we treasure, it seems, is our. As I know, is the welfare state as a whole. And right now, it's about pension reform that we're seeing the strikes. But we have seen hospital strikes as well. Here in the UK, the National Health Service, it kind of seems to symbolize that welfare state.
Yes, we don't have your strong tradition of strikes and taking to the street and, of course, revolution in the way that you do, which is perhaps a pity because we've had 30 years of incremental marketisation and privatisation, not just of the NHS, but of all the welfare state, including pensions, higher education, universities, prisons, you name it, everything has been put out to the market. So really over the last 30 years what we've witnessed is the breaking up of the social contract that was put in place in 1948.
The breaking up of the social contract?
Yes. Well, of course, the NHS is only one piece of our welfare state. You know, we had Beveridge's five giants, which was idleness, ignorance, want, squalor, poverty. So we had whole programs after the Second World War which were putting in place a right to housing, right to food, public transport, education, and of course health, the NHS. And of course the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, has been its most popular institution, the most popular of all the welfare state institutions.
And the last statistics we saw, and we talked about it in a recent edition of the France 24 debate, showed that despite all of the problems, including, I know, those lengthy waiting times when you want to have a procedure done, it's still a remarkably efficient system if you judge other OECD countries.
Well, it was the model maker for many countries across the world. In fact, it was remarkably cheap. At its inception, it was less than 3% of gross domestic product. And the government has always managed to contain the costs because it was publicly funded through central taxation and centrally administered, and there was strong state control. But of course, after Margaret Thatcher came to power, we began to see the breakup and privatisation of the NHS, which has happened very incrementally and in stages under all administrations, both Labour, Conservative, and of course the coalition between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats.
So that's when the unwinding begins, under Margaret Thatcher in the early 1980s.
Yes.
And the pendulum has never swung back the other way.
Well, interestingly enough, it has in Scotland and Wales, because what Scotland did post-devolution was to reverse most of the most harmful changes that were put in place of the market, really the internal market. Because what happened in 1990 was a big bang when the government brought in what it called an internal market, bringing in the disciplines of the market, though not moving towards direct privatisation. That didn't really happen for another 5 to 10 years.
Didn't happen for another 5 to 10 years. Right now, it's interesting what you're saying, because if you look at the whole of the UK, we've talked a lot about inequality. There's inequality between the regions.
Well, there's an enormous inequality which is widening between the rich and poor, which is both between the rich and poor, but also regional inequalities, the north-south divide that we see. So the north of the country, the northeast and Scotland, you're seeing widening inequalities, both in wealth and in health and life expectancy. So in some parts of the country, you can get a 20 or 30-year gap in life expectancy. There are some areas where life expectancy is as little as 40
A 20-year gap?
Absolutely. Yep. It's
Where?
Quite shocking. So in parts of Glasgow, you can see that. In parts of the northeast, you can see enormous gaps in life expectancy between rich and poor.
When you look at the issues that have been front and center during this campaign, has it been a healthy process in the sense that it's brought the conversation up, or has it just been, the usual political grandstanding?
Well, I think the most important thing are the manifestos of the political parties, and one of the tragedies is that our press don't really report on those manifestos properly. But what you see are very, very strong progressive ideals and manifestos with Labour and the SNP and the Green Party. So you see a commitment to abolish the market and privatisation, a commitment to renationalise our public services coming from the Labour Party and also from the Green Party. You do not see that in the Conservative or in the Liberal Democrat manifestos, unfortunately.
All right. And how much of an issue is it really going to be in the end? Because you get the sense after the Brexit referendum that there's this sort of tribal binary yes or no in Britain, and that's sort of trumps everything, including this issue of what's the future of the NHS.
Well, I think the media would like to tell us it trumps everything. But actually, domestic policy is really, really important for this country. You just need to walk down the embankment and you see the number of homeless. We never had food banks 10 years ago.
I totally...
3 million people in food banks.
Alison, I agree with what you're saying. My question is, when voters cast their ballots, is that something that's high on their minds?
Well, I can't speak for all the voters, but there is no doubt that the domestic policies are also high on their minds. And you see that with the debate on the National Health Service. Of course, they're concerned about Remain, Leave, independence, but they're going to be doing a balancing act. And really, if they have any sense, they're going to pick the parties who are going to do most for most of the people.
One final question: this unwinding that you talked about, it's not just Britain. Again, we talked at the outset about France, but it's in a lot of countries. Is it realistic with the aging population and the fact that wages haven't gone up for everyone, really, except for the very rich? Is it realistic to think we can continue or we can find a solution?
Of course. These are political decisions. After the Second World War, all of Europe was broke. We had to rebuild our countries piece by piece, and we could only do it through collective endeavour. Indeed, capitalism was largely dead. We had to nationalise all of our industries. So everything is possible. And the ageing population is a shibboleth. And we may be ageing, but people are giving back more than they take out, even in their older ages and in all sorts of ways. So it's about the political will. It's what we want as a society and how we want to live. And whether we want the freedom from fear, which was what we were given after the landslide election in the 1940s, the Labour landslide.
All right, Alison Pollock, the author of NHS PLC, the privatization of healthcare. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, just one final question. Will you be staying up late to watch the results, or will you go to bed early?
I watch the exit polls. And my heart sinks, but I can't resist. I always stay up all night to watch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Many
Fingers
thanks.
crossed.
Thank you, Alison. Alison Pollock joining us there. Yeah, we've been speaking to people all day who've been telling us that, they might stay up to see one or two constituencies declare, but then they will probably stay up for quite a long time. Until there is a solid trend when those polls do close at 10 p.m. Earlier, people casting their ballots, and you really had the sense they were energized. Case in point, constituency in West Brom near Birmingham.
Well, you've got these, they're almost all the MPs now are basically a rich elite. Nobody actually understands the working man. They've never done a proper hard day's work in a factory or anything like that. They haven't got a clue what it's like.
It's important we sort out Brexit because it's causing a lot of chaos, a lot of trouble and aggravation, and people need to have their minds at rest and peace of mind that it's sorted out properly.
And we're in the company of Emma Revell now, who is the Director of Communications for the Institute of Economic Affairs.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for having us. Tell us what the Institute of Economic Affairs is.
So we are a free market think tank, so we promote free market ideas and try and develop policies that will promote freedom and free markets in the UK.
All right. So it's election day, 2019. First off, I have to ask you the question that I've asked everyone. You voted this morning?
Yes, on my way to work.
Where did you vote?
I live in Camberwell in South London.
Okay. Were there a lot of people at the polling station?
No, but I live in a very solidly safe seat, so it's not going to change hands.
Right. So how much people turn out depends on how close they think it might be.
It's certainly one of the factors, yeah. I mean, my current MP has a 33,000 majority.
Right.
So unfortunately, it makes very little difference how most people where I live vote.
Yeah. We went, by the way, to a district where the last time around it was won by 20 seats, hence the fact that it was a different story from what you're describing. Here we are on the banks of the Thames, and we're all wondering, us, the rest of Europe, and the rest of the world even.
We're wondering too.
We're wondering what's going to happen tonight, and we're wondering what's going to happen to the UK. And I know the business community is divided over what's the best way forward.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of large international businesses that operate out of London and the City of London in the referendum were very pro-Remain. They saw the benefits of being a member of the EU. But I think over the interim 3 years to now, it's shifted between backing Remain to now just wanting to know what happens next. Uncertainty is a killer for business. When we were facing no deal, a lot of business leaders were privately saying, okay, no deal wouldn't be great for us, but actually we can plan for no deal. What we cannot plan for is uncertainty. So they'll be hoping for a decisive election result one way or the other so that they know what the next 6 months, 6 years are going to look like.
Because there was a poll that came out on Wednesday that showed that it was becoming more indecisive, it was narrowing, and when it did, the pound rose. Explain that to me.
I don't think I'm the best person to explain that to you. Markets operate in very mysterious ways, but they do appreciate certainty. Is really what markets need.
And I noticed the tone of the politicians has changed a lot since 2016. There's less of that talk of creating a Singapore upon Thames, that is to turn the UK into this giant free market zone.
Yeah, one of the issues, regardless of which side of the referendum you were on over the last few years, has been the differing views of what leave or remain would mean. And a lot of people who campaigned for leave were campaigning to leave the EU because they thought it would allow them to get rid of certain burdensome EU regulations, sign free trade deals with countries outside of the EU, Commonwealth countries, the United States, those sort of things, to encourage free trade. Not all leavers thought that way, and certainly a lot of people suspected that Boris Johnson was one of those people. Since he's become Prime Minister, his position has changed somewhat. The Conservatives have had, less free market policies in their manifesto than certainly people like me would like to have seen. They've gone very hard on high spending, on increasing public borrowing, things like that we wouldn't necessarily have expected to see when the election was called.
Because here's the dirty little secret, which is that if the incumbent Prime Minister wins, if on January 31st the UK exits the European Union, it's not over yet. It's only just beginning, because then there's all the negotiations over trade.
Yes.
At that point in time, and they're having an EU summit as we speak where they're talking about this, how much time do you think is needed to hash out a trade agreement?
Oh.
Third time. So we're lucky, because even though it's raining hard, we're under a tent, and it's been once in a while the water's been coming out the back. You didn't get wet there.
No, I'm just okay.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, a lot of the Conservative Party has gone really hard in this election on the slogan of "Get Brexit done." You need to vote for the Conservatives to get Brexit done. I think what that slogan ignores or denies is that Brexit isn't going to be done. You're completely right that actually we will need to sign not only a free trade deal with the EU, but we'll need to, we've already begun discussing free trade deals with other countries, but those conversations will need to progress. The speed of a trade deal depends on a lot of different things, how willing both sides are to compromise. I think the volume of trade between the UK and the EU means that both sides will want to get this done quickly. They're not going to want to drag it out, because that's going to cause problems on both sides if we end up with tariffs on imports or exports, for example. But there is also a concern that trade deals can take a lot of time.
Yeah, the EU trade negotiator Michel Barnier was saying that you can't get this done by the end of next year. It's just not possible. Is it possible, though?
I think Boris Johnson certainly thinks it's possible, and I would like to think it is, because we need to move on as a country. There are many other domestic policy issues that either haven't been looked at in enough detail in this election, or just haven't been looked at all, because so much of the oxygen of public debate is taken up by Brexit. But I think Michel Barnier is right to be cautious. Trade deals between the EU and other countries, Canada, for example, have taken 5-7 years. So it's probably not going to be as quick as Boris Johnson would like it to be.
All right. And then the UK, again, if Boris Johnson gets his way, the UK leaves, the UK signs a trade deal, it's out of the European Union, and its number one partner in trade will remain the EU.
I think it depends on whether you're looking at volume or yes, most of our, I think 50% of our trade is with the EU at present. That means 50% of it isn't with the EU. So, we're going to be looking at countries like Australia, like Canada, like Japan, China, the United States as well, which is the one sort of trade deal that has been talked about in this election, is the one with the United States. But there's no benefit to not having a really good free trade deal with the EU. We need that. The EU needs that. It's in everyone's interest to get that done.
One final question. What do you feel is best is what you were talking at the outset about how large multinational corporations led the charge for Remain back in 2016. Today, is there still that divide between big corporations and small businesses?
I think a lot of small business owners are less concerned about what leaving the EU will mean for them in terms of their buying and selling. Larger companies are the ones who export to the EU and other places. Not to say that small businesses don't. Small businesses are looking at it more in terms of their impact on their staff if they employ a lot of migrant labour from the EU, for example. I don't think it's quite as stark as it was in 2016, but I think the divide is probably still there.
All right, Emma Revell of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And
Thanks.
will you be staying up late?
I'm going to say, I've actually got to be on the radio at 6 o'clock in the morning, so I'm going to stay up till 10 for the exit poll and then sneak off home to bed.
So you're going to be up all night, is what you just said?
No. I'm having a quick sleep, then I'm getting up again.
Okay, Emma Revell, many thanks. And you don't have to be up all night, but you can join France 24 at 10 p.m. UK time, 11 p.m. in Paris. Mark Owen will be hosting the hour for a special edition at the close of the polls. I'll be here from London. We'll have the very first exit polls and projections as we wait to see what happens afterwards. The process could take a long time if you really want to stay up, because in those seats that will be hotly contested, they're expecting to announce in the middle of the night, in some cases as late as 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. So, yeah, it could be a while before we have clarity over what is the outcome of this general election 2019. At this point in time, I think we all need a bit of levity after this campaign. Stuart Heritage joins us. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on your book, which has just been translated into French. It's called Bedtime Stories for Worried Liberals.
Yes, yeah, or Boris Johnson and the Three Bears.
In French, it's Boris Johnson and the Three Bears. And basically, well, tell us what's in the book then.
Oh, it's like a compilation of all my terrible thoughts, basically. It's fairy tales retold, so they're about Brexit and Boris Johnson and just how terrible things are. They're supposed to make...
Are things terrible, Stuart?
Oh my God, things are so terrible. Look at this, it's like the apocalypse out here.
But that's the weather.
Oh, this has something to do with the whole setup. No, I'm really miserable today. I think things are going to go terribly, and tomorrow will be worse. So I've written a book to cheer myself up, basically.
Are you a pessimist by nature?
No, I wasn't. I never used to be. Now I feel like I am a bit. Yeah.
What's going on in the UK?
Oh, it's just a mess. I live in Kent, down in Kent, where it's just everybody voted Leave, and it's crazy because it's the closest part of the country to Europe, but everyone voted Leave. The seat where I live has got a very strong Conservative, very safe Conservative constituency, and there's just a feeling that nothing is going to change for the better, whatever happens.
Is it like in the USA where people don't talk to each other when it's holiday dinners?
Oh, so my dad voted Leave, and trying to maintain I didn't, obviously, because I wrote a book about liberalism, and just trying to maintain a relationship with him has been incredibly difficult. And the only middle ground we've sort of reached is things are bad, and we leave it there, and we don't say why things are bad, because we both think things are bad for opposite reasons.
The United Kingdom's always been this haven of temperance and moderation. What happens? What really happens? Do you think about it?
I think about it all the time. I'm worried that I think we used to have quite a good international standing, but why would we now? We must be, I assume we're a laughing stock. I can tell in your eyes that we are. I can tell in your eyes.
You certainly have our attention.
Oh, I'm so flattered. No, I think there was a very small sliver of the Conservative Party that were pushing for a referendum, and it was David Cameron did it to appease his party. He called a referendum without thinking it through, and I mean, it's torn everything apart. The Brexit referendum, and this is a consequence. This is the second general election since the referendum.
If it's any consolation, things have been torn apart, not just in the UK. We've seen a splintering in Spain, where they're going to have to revote again. The big centre-left and centre-right blocks here in France, completely shattered in the last presidential election. Germany is on the brink of serious gridlock. Italy has seen great upheavals. It's not just the UK.
It's not, but I feel like we're sort of the forebearers of that. I've been talking to some of my European friends, and they are, if Brexit happens, they are desperate for it to go as badly as possible for Britain to put off all the factions in their countries who want similar kind of have similar populist views.
All right, so talk us through it for our viewers abroad. What happens in general election? Usually they're not in winter. It feels like it's actually. Wait a minute. It feels like it has stopped. It's stopped raining. That's anyway. So that's
I'm not going to get one of those big splashes. No. Looking forward to that. It's like a theme park.
You're the only one who won't have.
I'll jump in the river.
But talk us through, because I was saying earlier how an election night in the UK. It takes a long time to count the ballots.
Yes, yeah. My constituency is one of the last, historically one of the last, and it'll come in when the sun's up tomorrow. It'll go through all the night, so it'll be maybe 8, maybe 7.
Do you stay up?
I have to stay up for my job. I have to cover the television coverage for The Guardian. But I wouldn't, if I had the choice, I would go straight to bed and just try and pretend it wasn't happening.
And so you're covering the television for The Guardian, and what happens in these all-nighters seem like a regular thing with each time, and it's more and more frequent because you've had a lot of polls recently.
Yeah, I know. No one's getting any sleep because we've got a general election every 3 weeks, it feels like. I don't know why people do it. The exit polls come out and everyone gets very sort of, nobody's happy in an exit poll, regardless of sort of your political persuasion.
Well, we were here in 2016. They were kind of wrong.
Yeah, yes. Oh, that was funny, though, because Paddy Ashdown from the Liberal Democrats promised that he would eat his hat if he was proved wrong, and then he got it wrong. So he had to, I don't think he ate a hat, but he should have done, because that's his word. No, you have to stay up, and there's all these weird little sort of very local traditions. Like there's between Newcastle and Sunderland, I think. They have a race to see who can count their ballots first. So at 10 o'clock, you'll see people with boxes charging across like a town hall and counting as quickly as they can. And it's weird little sort of local rituals like that happen.
Okay. And what will be the harbinger with tonight? Is there one? Is there a constituency you'll be looking at?
No, I would like to see some of Dominic Raab's constituency. He might be the big.
Where is his?
I can't remember. Okay. I'm sorry.
Neither can we. All right. Anyway, so the book is called Bedtime Stories for Worried Liberals. Stuart Heritage, good luck with that all-nighter.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Mehdi, thanks for joining us here on France 24. Yeah, and our coverage is going to continue now after with special editions. We're going to have a special edition of our own coming in tomorrow morning, and that'll be hosted by Catherine Norris-Trent. We'll again be at 10 p.m. UK time, 11 p.m. Here, 11 p.m. in Paris is when the polls close, and we will have the first exit polls at that time for you here on France 24. Mark Owen will be hosting that report for you on France 24. We were hoping to have have Catherine Norris-Trent, and is she coming? Oh, just a quick word. Oh, here she is. Catherine rushing over.
Hi, Francois.
Just a quick word, because we're almost out of time. What have you seen today?
We've seen a steady stream of people at polling stations and people telling us this is the most important election in their lifetime, in a generation. Obviously, people are very divided. Britain is divided, but on both sides of the political divide here, the main political divide anyway, people feeling very passionate about this.
And what time are you up tomorrow? What time is your first special?
First special coverage is from 6 a.m. British time, that's 7 a.m. Paris time.
All right here on France 24. Many thanks, Catherine Norstrand. Best of luck. Thank you for joining us for this special edition. Our coverage of UK General Election 2019 continues.